Okay, the next item on our agenda, thank you, is item 3, and this will be an informational presentation regarding the PID and the status of TOSIG disbursement review, provided by Mr. Richard Spence.
Good evening, Council. My name is Richard Spence. I'm with the firm of David Tussick and Associates in Newport Beach, California. We are the current service administrator for the Trophy Club PID number 1, and I thought it might be helpful, as I was requested by the Council this evening, to give you some background on PIDs, how they work, how they operate, and the specificity of your specific PID here in the Trophy Club. My presentation is going to be broken. I'll try to keep it short, by the way, and this is also not a lecture, so if there's any questions, please interrupt me at any time. I'm not here to just kind of give you a total discourse. My presentation is broken into 2 sections. One is to first discuss PIDs in general, the PID statute, and to understand how PIDs function, operate, and what you undertook in the terms of the formation of this PID. And then secondarily, and that's somewhat covered in a handout that we incorporated in your council agenda, if you've had a chance to see it. The second portion is going to be to take exactly what the PID statute did and what you did, and then let's relate that to how it impacted the city of the town of Trophy Club and each individual homeowner or lot and how the homeowner is impacted. So first, let's understand PIDs. The PID statute here in Texas is 372 of the local government code. It was actually written in the early 80s, and the PIDs are what we call special assessment districts. They're very unique in the state of Texas, and there are lots of districts that are used for many, many purposes. Most of them are used in terms of public infrastructure, public development, and most of them are governmental subdivisions, and most of them are tax-based or ad valorem-based districts. I'm sure you've heard of MUDs, freshwater districts, county development districts. All of these are various types of districts which are ad valorem. The PID is a very unique district, and it's one that is based on special assessments, and I'll discuss special assessments and how special assessments actually are invoked and what they actually do. Interestingly about special assessment districts have been around for quite a while. And our firm has been very much involved with them over the years. They actually emanated back in California when California taxpayers or California citizens passed their major tax proposition back in the late 70s because of the constant rise of ad valorem taxes. They passed a constitutional amendment which restricted the ability of communities to raise ad valorem taxes. So in order to offset that and recognizing that these communities still had to build and had to have the financial resources to put infrastructure in place in order to have the infrastructure ready for the expansion of the population, the government and the state legislature of California in the early 1980s passed what was called the Miller-Roos Bond Act, or the Miller-Roos Act. The Miller-Roos Act allowed each community to effectively take a specific land area and designate that as a district, a special assessment district. By designating it as a special assessment district, it also authorized the community to issue bonds based on the levy of assessments that only impacted and only affected that specific district. These were known as special assessment districts. So what it allowed builders to do, what it allowed communities to do, it allowed developers to do, were to go in and say, I want to develop my property, therefore designate my property as a special assessment district, and this is the infrastructure I want to build, which is all public infrastructure, therefore it benefits the community. It is conveyed to the community because it becomes public assets of the community, and I want the community to issue bonds, but the bonds will only be repaid from the collection of the assessments. And this is how the special assessment districts obviated the limitation on ad valorem tax rates, because these were not ad valorem taxes. These were not general tax rates. They were not general obligation bonds. They were specific assessment bonds, and the only way the bonds got paid back was from the collection of the assessments within the district, and the improvements only impacted the district. So that is effectively what we have in terms of the PID statute. These are not tax-based districts. A PID district is not a governmental subdivision. It does not have a board like a MUD or a freshwater district that is paid or paid annually. It is effectively nothing more than a designated area with no rights or authorities, but has been designated, and then the municipality issues the bonds based on the fact that it has levied an assessment in that district. So these are very self-contained. Yes.
If you don't mind,
Please,
I
Mike,
just want
please
to
do.
make
Yeah.
a clarifying point. You said PIDs don't have boards that are compensated. In fact, we do have a board here.
Okay, I'm thinking of the mud boards generally, which
Right.
Mud boards are much more, they have, I'm
You're
sure you have a
looking at-
PID
you're
board.
looking at the
A
PID board.
A PID board kind of oversees
Right.
PID action. Very rarely do we ever see a PID board
Just
because
wanted to make that point of
generally,
clarification.
most of the communities delegate all of what is required in the administration of the PID activity. They delegate that to an administrator, and that is effectively what you did when you brought us in several months ago. But the PID statute itself, Mike, does not require a formal board designation. You can have one that is designated within the community. But it's not like a mud board. A mud board actually has authority. It can actually legislate. It can actually levy taxes and take action. Whereas a PID is really a designated area. So what you have here within the City of Trophy Club in PID number 1, it was the formation of a district. Now, let me pass something out here which I think will be helpful to you. Julie, I'm going to give you one so you can follow along. I'm going to put half of them here, and I'll take half over to the other side. That'll move both ways. There's 14 of them in that stack. What you have here in the Trophy Club is effectively a developer who owned property, had a parcel of land, and he effectively wanted to find a way to finance the infrastructure for that property. There are 3 choices a developer can do. 1, he can put all of his own capital in, and he can build out all of the assets and all of the improvements, and then when they're all in, he can deed them over and convey them to the town. Or he can put construction financing on the project and be at the will of the banks or the will of his construction financing lender. Or he can form a PID and use tax-exempt bond financing to fund that infrastructure with long-term bond financing. That is exactly what the developer of this particular property wanted to do in the town of Trophy Club. So in terms of how the PID works, the developer designated his property and went to the town and said, "Town, I request and I hereby petition that you designate my property as a PID." So that was the first step in what happened when this PID got started. The developer came in, petitioned the town council, and the town council passed an ordinance whereby it in fact designated his property as a public improvement district. When that was done, and in the first page of this, which I've just handed out, you will see that he had a plan. He had a plan to build approximately 1,474 lots. And if you look down in the 3rd or 4th paragraph, you will see that he eventually, at one time, had a total cost of $51 million to put all of the improvements in. But obviously, he was only going to put that in phases. He wanted to build enough out to jumpstart and get the project going. So he initially had authorized improvements in the PID of $22 million, which you see in paragraph 3. And I'll tell you when to turn pages so that you don't get ahead of me. Now, what does a PID do? A PID, as I indicated, is number 1, a designation of a district. The second step, once it has been designated and the town council has approved it as a public improvement district, is to establish what in fact are you going to finance. Why does the developer want to finance it? Under the PID statute, going back here in Texas, 372 of the local government code, under the PID statute, a PID is capable of doing three things. One, it can acquire assets. For example, if he had already built streets but they had not yet been deeded, or if he had put some improvements in that had not been conveyed, the PID could theoretically pay for that. Number two, it can pay for new improvements. Or number three, and you also have this, a PID can act as a maintenance and operating or service entity for the district. So for example, we see communities all over Texas that have what are called M&O PIDs, maintenance and operations. They're done in parks. They're done in various areas where a assessment is levied to pay for certain services such as landscaping or medians or upgrades to roads, whatever the case may be. So there can be what is called a service functionality of a PID through annual assessments. But let's concentrate initially on the improvement element of it, because that was the key focus and that was the key rationale and key motivation for putting this PID in place. So the first step that was taken, we formed the PID. The next step that was taken was to determine exactly what do we want to finance. The developer presented a financing plan, and as you will see, now going to page 2, he suggested that in this first phase, I wanted authorized improvements of $22 million. We now see a list of what those improvements were, quoting $22 million, and the estimated completion date for when those improvements would be done. Under the PID statute, there are many, many elements that you can construct or finance or acquire with a PID. Typically, however, we look at the 4 classics in any private development, which are street, water, sewer, drainage. But you can go beyond that. You can acquire right-of-ways. You can put various parks in. You can put hiking and bike trails in. You can put various amenities that benefit the PID. However, all of the improvements, and this is the key to it, and we're going to get to this in just a moment, must benefit the PID. You can also have what are called off-site improvements. For example, in many cases, we see where you have to bring major roads into. You have to bring major sewer lines into the district in order to service the district. And those improvement costs benefit the district. They may benefit it in part or in whole, but they benefit the district. Therefore, they qualify under the PID statute for bond financing or capital financing or PID assessments. So we establish a budget of exactly what we're going to have to build and what we want to build. Going to page 3, you see this laid out in a little bit more of a table, and this now sets forth the various improvements. However, not all of these were going to be included in the PID financing. If you go to the next page, you will see that in actuality, out of the authorized improvements of $22 million on the prior page, the PID is only going to include and only going to pay for $20 million. And it's clear from the documentation. Incidentally, this documentation comes from a limited offering memorandum, which is about a 400-page document, which is the disclosure document that was the basis for the sale of the bonds and what the investors received to understand the basis in which they were purchasing the bonds. And unless somebody actually wants to go through all 400 pages, I've extracted some of these pages to kind of give you an overview of how this all works. So you can see that the authorized expenditures within the PID were only $20 million of the $22 million. The balance was to be paid by the developer. Then going to the next 2 pages, I'm not going to dwell on these, but you see the estimated project costs in great detail, that amount allocated to the PID, that amount excluded from the PID. So if you go to the bottom of the next page, you'll see $22 million, which is that same number of $22,438,000, $20,449,000 in the PID, $1,003,000 to be paid by the developer. And you see it by line item. So now it's very clear exactly what was going to be built, how much money was allocated for it, how much money was in the PID to pay for it, and how much the developer had to pay. Okay, at that point? Now, going to the next point, we now look at the bond offering. Once we have established exactly how much we're going to pay and what improvements we have and what the estimated cost, and incidentally, the estimated cost of those improvements is generally based on very detailed engineering certifications, and to support these costs, there was an engineering study and an engineering certification as part of the offering documents, which was a document that substantiated these expenditures. So this wasn't just out of the sky developer saying, I think I can do it for that. This was a qualified engineer, Carter Burgess, that actually put together the engineering report that supported all of these disbursements by line item. So once that was established, the bond offering was then created. Out of the bond offering, you can see $27,500,000. You look all the way down, you see the $20,449,000, which is back to the amount of the improvements that are within the PID. Remember, 22 million total, 20 million in the PID, the other 2 million by developer. And then these are the various elements that went into that $27.5 million. Now, how does that get paid? Well, the key to it is, and this takes us to the second step in a PID process. The first, if you recall, was the designation of the PID and the action by the town council to authorize and designate the PID through a resolution. The second step is to now take the $27 million of bond financing, which is the estimated amount of the bonds based on this schedule, and determine how that is going to be created to assessments, because it is only by the collection of the assessments that the bonds can get repaid. So we now have to go to the next step, which is to levy the assessments. The assessments are levied on the basis of the beneficial use or the beneficial benefit that every tax parcel only within the district receives and generates from these improvements. So as a result, we take the $27.5 million and we say, okay, I'm going to allocate so much of the benefit of the roads to this parcel or that parcel, so much of the water and sewer to this parcel or that parcel, and we go through a complete analysis which determines how every parcel is going to be assessed. And then we come back to the town council, we present an assessment plan, and the second step in the PID process for a capital bond transaction like this is to authorize the levy of the assessment. It is the levy of the assessment and the actual legal levy of that assessment which has now created the collateral for the bonds, the only collateral for the bonds. So let's go through the assessment process. We then go through, and we now know, and there are many, many different types of how you can benefit. For example, on water and sewer, how many gallons do you use? On street, what's your traffic count? How many roads? How much space do you have? You can do it on front footage. In this particular case, under the PID statute, one of the methods of benefit analysis is valuation analysis. So they took the 5 types of lots that were going to be within the district, which are part of the zoning and part of the improvement district analysis. They took the 5 lots and they said, this is the estimated value of the residence that is going to be built on each of these 5 lots. Lot type 1 had a $425,000 average residential valuation. Lot 2, $325,000. Lot 3, $265,000, and so on. So it broke it into the 5. That also then created what we call an equivalent unit value, an EUV, so that lot type 1 was a 1.0 EUE, but lot type 2 was 0.76. So all we then did at that point, if we go to the next page, is you take, I'm now on table 5B, is you take the 5 lots, the total dwelling units, you come down with the total equivalent value units, which is 986,119. You divide that into 27 million, and you come up with an assessment per equivalent unit of $27,885. You then, of course, use your multiplier as you get to lot 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is the next table below that. And as you can see, all lot types 1s were allocated a $27,000 assessment. Lot 2s a $21,000, and so on. Yes, Mayor.
I have just 2 quick questions.
Sure.
Reserve fund, what is that?
Reserve fund is in the event the developer or the landowner is not able to pay interest on the bond offering when the bonds are, it does not make its assessment payment. As you go into a default period and eventually into a collection period, the trustee can evade the reserve fund in order to pay delinquent interest in order to keep the bond current. It's only for the use of delinquent, it's to supplement delinquent payments until those delinquent collections can be made.
And assuming there's no delinquency,
That reserve fund eventually is used to pay off the bonds at the very end.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah.
The other thing is that the number of units to calculate the assessment is 986.
That's
and-
the equivalent unit. The actual residential units, remember, was 1,400.
Oh, okay, that's the difference. Thank
See,
you.
what we've done is we've taken, when you get down to .76, if you had 100
Right.
of units too, you only have 76 equivalent dwelling units.
Yeah,
So you've got 1,440 lots, but we only have 986 equivalent dwelling units. So that's how we got to the calculation in the next table, which is a lot type 1 had a 1.0 equivalent dwelling unit assessment of 27,000, but lot type 2 had a .76 equivalent dwelling unit, so it was only assessed 21,000. So this was the determination of benefit in that the larger homes, the more expensive homes, the bigger lots benefited more from the benefit of all of these improvements. That's the theory, and that's an acceptable theory, okay? So we now established the basis for which every lot was going to be assessed. And it was with this plan that was taken to the town council, and the town council accepted this plan in a motion and authorized the levy of these assessments. That became the collateral for the bonds, which then set the stage for the third step, which was in fact the authorization to issue the bonds. So 3 actions in a capital PID. Authorize the PID, authorize and levy the assessments, authorize the sale of the bonds. Simple as that. It's not a complicated process. This is how the assessment methodology was done. You now see this in the next page, which is actually, and assessments are levied against tax parcels. So when the parcels were originally assessed, what's interesting about this is very few of these parcels were subdivided. If you go to the next page, you can see, and always, the total assessments always equal the total amount of the bonds. So there was exactly $27.5 million in assessments. The bond issue was $27 million, and this is how these assessments were allocated among every tax parcel because many of them had not been subdivided. If you look at the schedule, you can see that about 4 or 5 of the number 2 lots at 21,193 had actually been subdivided. Everything else had not been. So we allocate assessments by tax parcels, and then these are subsequently subdivided and the same assessment base, because you can never increase this assessment. So if you take the first one with $1,600,000, that could be 100 lots or 75 lots. But it always has to be broken down into these assessment bases.
okay,
Yes, Mike?
question, Dave. We had the initial assessment. And what I just heard you say is you can't ever adjust or increase that assessment.
You cannot increase it beyond 27,500 or beyond the limits of these dwelling units. Principal amount, principal.
Principal amount of the assessment.
Yeah.
Okay.
But your interest on the assessment will change based on how many bonds are outstanding. So you calculate an annual debt service payment, but your principal amount doesn't change, but your collection cost number and your interest number will.
We're going to get there in just a sec. Julie's absolutely correct. Okay, so far? So this was the basis for the assessment. All I'm pointing out here, total tax parcels. Some you'll notice have 0. These are called non-benefited parcels, by the way. I don't know what they were, but they didn't benefit, so they got no assessment. Probably, vacant land, or, maybe they're going to be parks or something like that. So now we take a look at, and we actually see a particular lot. And we look at this particular lot. Notice there were several of these. This is I think this is lot number 2, and this was 21,193. And what I want to point out here, this is exactly what Julie was just talking about. What's interesting about the assessment plan is typically an assessment, and if you look at an assessment, it is it operates generally exactly like a mortgage on your home. Where you have 30-year bonds, you would have a 30-year mortgage. If I buy a house, I put a $100,000 mortgage on it, my interest is 5.5%. I'm going to pay approximately $6,500 to $6,600 a year for 30 years. At the end of 30 years, I've amortized my mortgage and the mortgage goes away. An assessment works exactly like that in general. Now, there are a couple of variations. I'm going to show them to you. What's interesting about that analogy also is at any point in time, I can come in and I can pay my mortgage off at par, no penalty, no prepayment penalty, and the mortgage goes away and I never make another mortgage payment. That is exactly the way these capital assessments work. If you pay it off, it goes away, you never pay it again. And the most important thing and the beautiful thing about PIDs, why we like them so much as assessment districts, is in tax districts, if you have defaults of one property or another, and you cannot pay the taxes or the taxes are not paid, the obligation for the tax burden falls on the entire district. It is a joint and several obligation. Under assessment-based districts like this, every assessment stands individual, unique, alone, can be paid at any time at par, and is never impacted by the obligation of any unpaid assessment. Very important to understand. Yes, sir.
So, in our PID number 1, we've got a lot of
Vacant land out there.
vacant properties that no one owns other than the developer.
Yeah, well, let's assume he
So the
doesn't pay.
developer, in effect, is paying that portion of this assessment every year until such time he's subdivided and sold it to a
Another
potential
party.
homeowner.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And if he defaults on that, has no impact on homeowner over here who pays his assessment. Now, it has impacts on the bonds, and we can talk about that if you want to, but has no impact on any other. No other homeowner is obligated to pay that obligation. So what we now have in here is the assessment schedule. This is on this particular lot. This was a lot classification 4. The assessment was $21,000. And what you see is a plan of what this is going to cost this homeowner over a 30-year period. Now, if this was a fixed-rate mortgage, and this was a fixed-rate bond issue, by the way, my payment for 30 years would be level every year and would be fixed. But notice this increases every year. What happened in this particular case, and we have this flexibility, it doesn't change the principle, but you can start with a lower payment in the earlier years and increase it over a period of time so that effectively you do it for marketing purposes. For example, let's assume I want to put a second mortgage on my house for 10%, but I can't pay 10% right now, so I structure my current interest payment at 4%, but I escalate the payment every month over 360 months so that by the time I get out to the 30th year, I'm paying a lot more, which, of course, brings the net worth or the present value all down to what was the original interest and provides enough money to fully amortize the bond issue. That's what happened here. In actuality, what they did is they escalated the annual assessment payment by 1.5% a year over the 30-year period. That allowed the developer to come in with a lower assessment payment in the earlier years so that it didn't appear to be quite as onerous on the homeowner, and then escalate it over a period of time to make sure that the bonds were fully amortized. Interest rate never changed, but the payment did because it was escalated over a period of time. Yes,
Does that
ma'am.
also mean that he, on all the other property that isn't yet built,
Has the same schedule.
carrying it at the low end, at the lower,
Exactly. That is exactly right.
so he's shifting the burden?
Not shifting. Don't forget, this burden is on every single tax parcel. Whoever owns that tax parcel has that burden.
Right.
Now, is he shifting the burden to
The
a later
future
payments to
owner.
the future homeowners? Potentially, yes, absolutely. No question about it. But obviously, that is disclosed, and every homeowner, and I have a copy of a disclosure document, if you want to see one, that a homeowner has to sign the homeowner is aware of this schedule, acknowledges it, knows this assessment is in place, and knows this payment schedule, and knows that they can pay this assessment off at any time. I told you I thought the payment was level, Mike. I apologize. I
must
hadn't
have
read.
been sleeping at that time.
Huh? No, I misinformed you. You do have an escalating payment.
Who authorized the escalating payment?
It's part of the bond structure.
Okay,
And when
in
the city
effect,
council,
did.
when the town council issued the bonds were issued with these terms in place.
Okay.
That's correct. Because the bond
Not this
issuance,
council, but whatever council
whatever
issued.
council was here, authorized
I stand
this
corrected.
bond structure. And there could be many bond structures. I see bond structures with 7-year interest only. I see bond structures with 5 years variable interest, convertible to fixed interest. In this particular case, incidentally, no principal is paid in the first 3 years because we had what was called a capitalized interest account. Only in 2011 are we beginning to actually pay principal. So what's interesting about this now is to see how this, yes, sir.
If I could just briefly, I want
Yes.
to clarify one thing.
Sure.
On this particular lot assessment, with respect to a lot that's not developed or an area that's not developed that the developer has, and he is making these payments in that case, is that correct?
I would assume if he's
And
not, then he is in default and he
Okay.
would be subject to.
And so his payments also. they
Parallel
start
exactly this.
Parallel, so they're also increasing the longer he holds the lot,
Go back one page.
okay?
Let's assume that he is still holding the first one,
Yes,
okay? That $1,600,000 assessment.
yes.
If you take this 21,000 and extrapolate it into there, he's making exactly the same payments.
Thank you.
Okay? So now we go, and we're now 3 years into this program, and we're starting, and we have just completed a service and assessment plan, which we've updated, and we are now, and we've just issued the assessments that are going to be collected. If you recall, you adopted it on September 30, so it can be included with the collection by the tax collection office, Denton County?
Yes.
Yeah, Denton County, for the 2011 and the January 2011 tax payment. We projected it at $686.74. Well, now, we just completed our, and so the next one is the public assessment roll, which we just put, now this is in our updated services and assessment plan, Exhibit A, and look at the check mark, and you can see, same lot, 2011, $686.83, but when it was originally projected back, it was $686.74. There's only a 9-cent difference. There you go. I'll give you a dime, Mike.
Wait a minute. It says 686.83, and here it says 680.09.
No, it says 686.74. Go back to the page before it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
13.
Sorry. Reading wrong.
See the page before it? This is what it was projected to be in 2010.
Okay.
Was 686.74. In our 2010 new assessment roll, it is 686.83. 9-cent difference. What creates that? What happens is there's always little imbalances that have to be taken care of each year. For example, last year we had $48,500 in assessment prepayments. Several homeowners decided to pay their assessment off. Well, we can only redeem bonds in $1,000 increments. So, for example, that extra $500 to $600 that we received in redemptions, that sits in a redemption account until the next redemption period. But guess what? That redemption account only earns 1% or 0.5%, but the bonds that are going to be redeemed with that $500,000 are still carrying an interest rate of 8.5%. So there's little things like that that have to get adjusted each year. And that's what creates these things. That's why we update the service and assessment plan every year and issue a new assessment roll, and it's generally right on target. That's why I wanted to show you this.
Now, if a person's buying a home, could they, like, this total assessment of
$21,000.
$21,000, does that include the interest?
No, that's principal.
Okay, so,
If you look at the bottom, if you would, Mayor, go back a sheet just for a minute. Look at the bottom. Remember the $21,000 up there? Look at the bottom. They're gonna pay $59,000 over the 30 years, just like your mortgage.
So if the person was buying the house, if the person's buying the house, it would behoove them to put that full amount into their mortgage, because they're only gonna pay that then at maybe 5%.
Absolutely
As
correct.
opposed
It
to
depends on
8.25%.
interest rate arbitrage. You're absolutely correct. Would it be cheaper for them to pay off the 21,000 and borrow it from their bank at 4% or 5%, or pay the PID assessment at 8.5%? Clearly, it's to their advantage to put it into their mortgage. You're absolutely correct. Yes, sir.
Well, there's more difference than that, because at the present time, isn't the assessment not tax deductible?
Very good point. First of all, I don't want to give you tax advice because I am not a tax attorney and I'm not here to offer tax advice. Let's go to the last page of the presentation. The last page of the presentation is what the homeowner sees. This is what our little friend with the $21,000 assessment sees. This is the lot type 2. This is the typical tax bill that he's going to get for this October. It'll come out and he'll pay it in January. And you'll note there's Denton County, Town of Trophy Club, ISD, Trophy Club Emergency Services, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then there's our good old installment, $1,686.83. There's our PID assessment, right? Now, if you were the homeowner, what would you do with this tax bill?
I'd show it all as tax.
Exactly. Thank you.
It says it.
Thank you. And that is typically what happens.
Not legal.
I didn't say, I'm not giving any advice. I'm not suggesting any advice. I'm just suggesting what the typical homeowner does when he receives this tax bill, because this is normally in his escrow payment, and he's turned this over to his escrow company, and this is what the escrow company has reported to him in terms of his payment. Now, actually, what they should do is they should carve out and only deduct the interest portion and not deduct the principal. And as administrators, if a homeowner requests that information from us, we will provide it. But I have never had a request in many, many years.
What can you carve any of it out? What does it qualify as? It doesn't
Interest.
qualify as the mortgage on the principal residence.
No, the
interest-
principal, you cannot deduct the principal for tax purposes.
Right, but how can you deduct the interest?
Oh, because you are paying interest. Just like you can pay interest, whether you pay taxes or interest, it's an assessment. You can pay interest on an assessment, just like you
Doesn't
pay.
make it tax
you deduct-
deductible, though.
You deduct interest on your mortgage.
Oh, but this is not a mortgage, is it?
No, it's an assessment, and it has an interest burden, which is a levy against the property, so
So by
it
the
can be
IRS code, then
deducted.
it's not tax deductible either.
Excuse me?
It's not tax deductible either,
What is not?
the interest.
Yes, the interest is tax deductible. Again, I don't want to get into a tax discussion because I'm not a tax attorney. And unless Julie wishes to comment on that, but I wish to stay out of it.
Tax attorney either.
Yeah, okay, then we're staying out of that.
But didn't you say the first 3 years are only paying the interest?
No,
That-
that's not what it,
No, no, no.
It's from bond proceeds. We put a, there's a pot of cash for capitalized interest that makes the interest payment on the bonds. It
But they're
doesn't
still
change-
amortized.
Doesn't change what the homeowner pays.
Yeah.
It just changes what's available to pay the bonds.
And once again, that was at 8, the bond was done at 8.5%?
I don't think that's right. I think it was actually 7 and
Yeah,
a half, or 7 and 3/4. I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly. It wasn't 8.5.
Are these bonds callable
I think they had a lockout of, what, 5 years or 7 years?
and/or refundable?
My question
They,
is
they can, they can be refunded at a appropriate point in time, and I was going to address that. Julie, you may want to comment on it.
Yes and yes. I'd have to look at the bond documents. I don't remember if it's a 10-year call or if it's, it may be a shorter call. I can't remember what the market was bearing at the time. You could, of course, refund them under tax law. You could do an advance refunding, obviously, if it made sense to do so. But of course, you have to consider the market, and if you could remarket these bonds as refunding bonds with the same security that you have now, and that's all, your financial advisor would have to run that.
Now, the fact of the matter is, and it's a very good question, Mike, because as you move forward and as more of this property is developed and as more lots are sold and as more ad valorem is placed, look at the collateral for this ad valorem. When this $21,000 assessment was placed on this lot, the only collateral for that lot or for that assessment was the value of that lot, which may have been $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Now there's a $350,000 home on it. Is the collateral a better base of collateral for that assessment? Of course, it's 10 times the collateral. So as you put more ad valorem on, more collateral, a refunding of these bonds in a period of 7 to 10 years becomes very attractive and would save homeowners in the community a significant amount of future interest cost. So that certainly is a consideration to undertake, and your financial advisor would certainly be helpful in that regard. So that brings you full circle in terms of what a PID is, how the PID was formed, the authorizations, what the total construction cost was, how the bond amount was determined, how the assessments were determined, the action of the town council and the levy assessments, the authorization of the bond issue, and how it impacted every homeowner. And ultimately, what did it do for the city? As we know, is it allowed $22 million of improvements to be put in place with long-term bond financing in a tough market where he didn't have the problem of having banks coming after him day after day to put these improvements in place, which jump-started a major development, which in turn created a lot of homeowner interest. And I think this town has benefited dramatically from this project, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Any questions?
I just want to say thank you very much, first of all. I think that is the clearest explanation I've heard of any of this, and I really, really appreciate that.
That's called PID 101.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
I have you referenced the disclosure statements. You said you had a copy of it. Could you leave me a copy of that or send it to me?
I'll send it to you. It's, as I said, it's a 400-page document. I have a copy here.
No,
No,
the
no.
disclosure statement that a homeowner signs.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want the 400.
I'll give it to you.
Thank
No,
you.
I have it. I- I'll give it to you. I
I'd
have
like
an
to
extra
see
one
that
here with me.
disclosed.
I
And are
have
the
it too.
title companies are the ones that get that signed off on? Is that when that's signed?
I don't actually know.
There are two. In the original landowner agreement between the landowners of the property and the PID and the town, which was signed before assessments were levied, there's a requirement for a home buyer education program that requires the home builders to disclose that the home buyer is buying property in the PID. There's also a statutory provision in the property code that requires when a builder sells and puts house under contract and sells it, they have to disclose to the buyer that it's in the PID. In addition, there is a one-page notice filed in the property records stating that you are in a PID. So when title company does its search, it should pop up a notice that you're within a PID and subject to a special assessment by the town of TrophyClub.
This is the actual notice, and I'll leave you a copy.
That all occurs, though, at closing, right?
If anybody else would like one.
The home?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not at contract time?
No, I believe the property code requires you in your contract materials to give that over, but I'd have to double check it here.
And I would really question, because I would like to know what recourse we have, because I've heard comments from people that it hasn't been fully disclosed, especially not early on.
Well, let me
And
just say
what do we
from a-
need to do to ensure that people are given the right?
There's kind of two avenues of thought. One is practical and one is legal. Legally, you don't have to do anything. Under the statute, it functions, it kind of looks like a tax, but it's not. The fact that you levied it, people are subject to it whether or not there's any disclosure in the public record or anywhere else. Just like you don't, in your time, you don't have to give people notice of their property taxes in a document when they go and sign. You don't have to do this either. From a practical standpoint, what the town decided when we did this was best practices was let's try to hit it from three angles. Let's make sure that our builders agree that they will have a home buyer education program where people sign off. There's a statutory provision that requires notice, and we're also gonna file something of record, so that if someone does a title search, you'll see that there's something in the title. Now, as to whether or not the builders comply and the title company does a proper search is a little bit out of y'all's control.
The other disclosure document I was talking about was this beautiful 400-page document, if you ever want to read it. This was the actual offering that the Bank of America used to induce investors to buy the $27.5 million worth of bonds.
You've given me what I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, just as a means of closure to this presentation, Councilman Stotts suggested, and I thought it was a really good idea, that we have a PID board meeting, maybe once or twice a year, and facilitate that meeting and ensure that the homeowners that live in that PID area are certainly invited to a similar presentation, in addition to the fact that TOSIG is currently underway with a audit of his predecessor and the expenses that have incurred up to this point. But it allows you as a PID board to focus on PID issues exclusively. And we'll do a good job of, or at least make an attempt to do a good job of communicating that to the PID owners, property owners out there, so that, you know, I know that there's a lot of misunderstanding and unknown, and we want to certainly make it available to those property owners, the same kind of information that you're getting today.
Okay, and we'll certainly cooperate with you on that. Let me just make one comment, if I may. As Mr. Sly has indicated, we were engaged to perform what's called we were engaged to become the service administrator, the administrator for the PID, which means putting together the updated annual service and assessment plans. We also were asked to take on a second engagement once that work was completed as of October 1st, and that was to review all of the prior disbursements that have occurred up to this point in time. We are in the process of doing that now. Therefore, our example at this point, just shy of 100 disbursement requests since the inception of this program. We're going through each of them to review the documentation, review the compliance, and review them against the line items that were required as a preliminary, and we're still in the process of that study. I hope to have that study completed certainly within the next several weeks, and we will work with your town manager to inform him and begin to, and we'll come here to make a presentation of that report. What we've seen to date, and just to kind of give you a heads up, of the $22 million, and I don't have all of the exact numbers, so I can't go into it at this time, but about 20 million of that has actually been dispersed to date. So this thing at this point is about 90% complete, and there's only one or two projects that really remain that are not 100% completed. So you are coming down to the closure on this pretty quickly.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, sir. Yes?
Madam Mayor, this isn't really for you, Mr. Spence, it's really for the council here. I would like to encourage the town to think about updating their fact sheet that is on the website. It does not reference at all the assessments that are in the PID. It talks about taxes. It does talk about the PID emergency services tax, which is a tax, but it does not even asterisk the fact that there are assessments attached with this. And I think this is a piece of what the council, when they went into this PID, had said they would do, and that is make sure that people know what they're getting and what their costs are going to be. And I would really like to see that added to this page if we could think of a way. And obviously, each one's different.
You
So
can
you gotta
you
work
can
on it a
extract
little
that
bit.
from our updated service and assessment
Right.
plan, and you may want to. It's not a long document. It's a very easy document.
But I think when somebody's moving to town or thinking about where they're going to move, they look at these fact sheets and they look to see what's available here and what it's going to cost them for their quality of life that they're getting. And I just think that should be explained in here too.
I think you're right.
It really has nothing to
No,
do
I agree.
with
Thank-
your group.
thank you
but
very
I
much.
Thank you.
I appreciate the presentation, and I also think that one of the things that we need to look at as council, we need to find out exactly what that refunding, when we can do a refunding on that bond and start considering that.
Thank you. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, when did you say the bonds were originally sold?
In 2007. Yeah, December of 2007. December
So we're
13th,
just 3 years.
2007.
Thank you. And you'll look into the sheet. Did anyone else have any questions or comments? I do agree with Councilman Scott's suggestion about a PID board. I think it's really important to make that information clear and understandable to everyone, as well as recognizing the needs of the people that are in the PID. They shouldn't be separate kind of citizens, but at the same time, we need to recognize the needs that they bring to the table. So I think that's a really good suggestion. So you'll work on scheduling that?
I will.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Thank you very much. It was excellent.